Sementilli, defendants present, all counsel present, jury, and also present. Good morning. Thank you, Esther, with the donuts. I had the largest fight of my life a little while ago. I opened the box just to look, and every one of them called my name, literally called my name. I had to say no. Judge Ferrero, please take the stand. You're still under oath. And you may inquire.
When we left off yesterday, we were talking about the large-scale operation you and your partner set up to take place in Vancouver, Washington regarding Christopher Austin.
Correct.
With respect to what's been referred to in this court as Perkins operations, where a suspect is placed into a jail cell with an undercover agent posing as an inmate, is that procedure used solely on homicide cases and maybe some violent crime?
Yes, it's used exclusively, or it's restricted for homicide or serious violent felonies.
Okay. So it's not something that takes place every day?
Correct.
And within robbery homicide division, we heard that there are different sections, such as the homicide section as well as the surveillance section. We've heard from SIS. There's also, as you mentioned yesterday, I believe, individuals who are responsible for the planning, coordination, and execution of all Perkins operations that occur within the city of Los Angeles.
Correct.
And those detectives also travel out of state in order to assist detectives such as yourself and Detective Byers on cases that originate from LA County but where suspects are out of state. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And sometimes also assist detectives from other jurisdictions that might come into the city?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And there is an entire set of protocols that apply to those operations, correct?
Correct.
And so you brought those individuals with you when you went up with your team to arrest Mr. Austin and to conduct a Perkins operation, correct?
Yes, they helped facilitate the Perkins operation in Vancouver, Washington.
Okay. And I believe you told us yesterday that you and your partner coordinated before you flew out with the team to Vancouver, Washington with the Vancouver Police Department.
Correct.
Given that it wasn't your jurisdiction.
Correct.
Okay. And so when did you and your partner and your team fly out to Vancouver, Washington?
It was at the beginning of October. We flew out before the actual operation to set things up, to brief the Vancouver Police Department, and to make sure that the operation was set to move forward on October 2nd.
And whenever there is a Perkins operation, there's always a briefing that takes place so that everybody understands what their roles are, correct?
Yes, the Perkins briefing is separate. The general briefing, which would establish what everybody's role was in the arrest and subsequent search warrants, and additional interviews that were done in accordance with the operation in Vancouver, Washington.
Okay. And so when you said that you and your team flew out the beginning of October, that would be beginning of October of this past year, 2024, correct?
Correct, 2024.
All right. And when you mentioned search warrants, was there also a team of detectives that was tasked with serving a search warrant at Mr. Austin's home?
Yes.
And during that warrant were various electronic items recovered, such as computers, hard drives, cell phones, things of that nature that might contain data.
Yes.
And did you also recover Mr. Austin's main cell phone, not his work cell phone for the probation and parole department for the state of Oregon, but his personal?
Yes.
And was that relative to a phone number 907-306-7486?
Correct.
And I believe we have marked his celebrate extraction for that cell phone as maybe it's a CDRs. That was marked as, yes, for this exact phone number as Exhibit 244. Okay. And during this procedure, was a team also tasked with interviewing his wife, Chloe?
Yes.
And was Mr. Austin then arrested on October 2nd of 2024 by the Vancouver Police Department in conjunction with your operations?
He was.
All right. Now, it's been brought out through Mr. Austin as to what he recalls occurring, but from your side of it, is there something that happens at the beginning of a Perkins operation or at some point during a Perkins operation once the target is placed inside of a cell?
Yes.
And what is that?
So detectives, one of the detectives, if not both, depending on the circumstances, will come and provide information to the arrestee in order to try and elicit a conversation between the Perkins agent and the arrestee. And so, because the assumption is that the Perkins agent is in the cell and does not know any information about the arrestee's arrest, so by introducing information, it potentially could spark a conversation about the case.
Okay. And that's referred to sometimes, I think we've heard, as stimulation?
Yes.
Okay. When the stimulation, the first round of stimulation was done after Mr. Austin was placed into a cell in Vancouver Police Department's jurisdiction, was the Perkins agent or the undercover agent already in the cell when the stimulation was done?
I believe so.
And was that stimulation where you come to the cell door and provide information, was that done by you?
Yes. And yes, he was in the cell. I misunderstood your question. He was already in the cell.
Okay. And did you explain to Mr. Austin in front of the undercover cellmate that you wanted to know, with respect to the murder of Fabio Sementilli, what everybody's role was who was involved in the operation?
Correct. I introduced myself as a detective from the Los Angeles Police Department, made him aware that he was being detained for a warrant from Los Angeles. And I did explain that our goal was to speak with him so that we could obtain information as to everyone's role in the murder of Fabio Sementilli.
Okay. And at that time, did you also tell him that you and your partner wanted him to be honest?
I did.
At any point in time, did you use the name of Monica or Monica Sementilli when you were conducting your stimulation at the cell door?
I did not.
At that point, did you leave Mr. Austin in the cell at Vancouver Police Department with the undercover inmate?
I did.
Okay. And when this is set up, is there a recording device inside of the cell?
Yes.
And does it allow you and anyone else who is monitoring the situation, such as the detectives who run these Perkins operations for the city, are they able to listen simultaneously to any conversation that might occur?
Yes.
And at that point in time, were there hours and hours of silence from Mr. Austin?
Initially, there was silence from Mr. Austin, yes.
Okay. At some point in time, did you go back to the cell containing Mr. Austin and the undercover agent posing as an inmate and again attempt to provide information to Mr. Austin in front of the cellmate to provide a potential stimulation?
I did.
Okay. And at that point, did you show him certain photographs?
I did.
And what were those photographs of?
I showed him a still photograph of the surveillance photo which shows the two joggers coming up to the Sementilli residence. I also showed him a photograph of the Porsche. It's a still photograph from the surveillance video of the Porsche leaving the residence after the murder.
And did you, at the same time, explain to Mr. Austin that you and your partner knew how he got to the crime scene and left from the crime scene, but you wanted to talk about the part in between?
Correct.
All right. And again, did you stress to Mr. Austin that you wanted him to be honest with you?
Yes.
All right. And at that point, did you once again leave him in the cell?
Yes.
And throughout that day, did you and your partner, as we heard from Mr. Austin, have various conversations with Mr. Austin after you removed him from the cell and then would place him back in with the undercover agent?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at some point after that day, did you and your partner cause documentation to be filed for the extradition of Mr. Austin to LA County to face charges?
Yes.
Okay. And after that, did you and your partner, as well as the team from LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division, return to Los Angeles?
We did.
Okay. And at some point after that, was Mr. Austin indeed extradited to LA County?
He was.
All right. Through the normal procedures, is that right?
Correct.
At in November of 2024, beginning on November 18th, did you and your partner sit down with Mr. Austin at the Robbery Homicide Division?
Yes, we participated in a proffer session.
What is a proffer session?
It's facilitated by your office, by yourself and Ms. Stagel, in which and Mr. Austin is represented by his attorney, and it's a situation where Mr. Austin is asked to provide all of the truthful information he knows about the case in a formal setting.
Okay. And is that a setting where there is a court reporter present who transcribes what's being said, as well as a recording
Yes.
created, an audio recording?
Yes.
Okay. And did that continue after the date of November 18th to another date 2 days later on November 20th, again at the Robbery Homicide Division?
Yes, it did.
And did you and your partner cause Mr. Austin to be removed from the LA County jails in order to be brought out to Robbery Homicide Division to conduct those interviews?
We did.
Right. Now, during the recounting of what occurred after Mr. Austin flew into LAX on January 22nd of 2017, the day before the murder of Mr. Sementilli, did Mr. Austin begin describing going to a restaurant?
He did.
And did he describe that this restaurant was a restaurant that he did not know the name?
Correct.
And did he describe the location?
He did.
Did he describe the location as being in an L-shaped strip mall?
Yes.
And did he also describe the location as there being pillars, much as he described here in court during his testimony?
He did.
Did he also describe to you and Detective Byers, as well as to myself and Ms. Stagel, that there was a parking lot, a large parking lot behind the strip mall?
He did.
Did he also describe various or mention various types of businesses that were located in the mall at that time in 2017?
He did.
We're going to object to the leading.
Those other questions were not leading. It's over.
Did he do so?
He did. He described the nail salon. He described the pillars. He described the L shape. Described the parking lot in the back.
Did he also mention anything regarding a restaurant or a food place?
He did. He mentioned a Chinese restaurant.
Okay. Did he also describe anything regarding a postal or mail service in the location?
I believe he mentioned a UPS store.
And was he not only unaware of where the location was, other than it being in the San Fernando Valley, but did he also tell you whether or not he knew the address of the location?
Objection, compound, and cost of circulation.
Overruled.
He did not provide the address of the location. He didn't know. He only provided a physical description.
At the point in time where he was describing what had occurred on the night of January 22nd of 2017 and this location, had you ever heard any information relating to this before?
No, this was the first time through my examination of the prior investigations as well as our investigation that we had any information that any event of significance had occurred the day before the murder on the 22nd. It was Mr. Austin who drew our attention to it.
So did any of the investigative materials contained in this case mention anything regarding an attempted hit on Mr. Sementilli the night prior to his murder?
Not until that day in the proffer with Mr. Austin.
At some point in time, as Mr. Austin was describing the location, did he mention anything about a nearby grocery store?
He did.
Did he know the name of the grocery store.
He did not. He said a grocery store.
And contrary to what was asked, stated by defense counsel yesterday, was he asked what store was nearby?
Nor object, argument.
Sustained.
Was he asked, when he mentioned a store, what store it was?
When he mentioned grocery store, there was an attempt to identify which grocery store or which grocery store chain he was referring to, but he was unsure as to which grocery store it was.
And was he, even before we got to the fact of it being a grocery store, did he simply mention that it was in close proximity to a store?
Objection in this case, the evidence.
Still rule.
Yes.
And did he indicate that the store was not too far from Mr. Baker's home?
Yes.
When he was asked what type of store, whether it was a drugstore, a supermarket, or other type of store, at that point, did Mr. Austin indicate, in fact, that it was a grocery store, as you've just said?
Yes. When pressed, he said grocery store.
And at that point, did Mr. Austin ask the group what type of, or what grocery stores were popular in the San Fernando Valley area or here in California?
Yes.
And did he mention that Ralph's is popular in California?
I think someone mentioned Ralph's, but I'm not sure if it was Mr. Austin or not.
And then did Mr. Austin ask, as opposed to stating it was a Ralph's, that the question of, is it a Ralph's?
I believe so.
Okay. And at that point, did he say it was a grocery store, given that he didn't know the name?
Objection. Calls for speculation as he didn't know the name.
Sustained.
Did the witness, Mr. Austin, state, but it was a grocery store,
Yes.
without giving any name?
Correct. He was unsure of the name or the grocery store name.
At that point in time, was a break taken from the interview process?
Yes.
And then outside of his presence, was there then a search on a computer to try and identify the location that Mr. Austin was describing that was not too far from Mr. Baker's apartment?
Yes.
Was there also a search at that point in time on a computer at Robbery Homicide Division of the defendants and the victims' cell phone extractions?
Yes.
And was the search specific to whether or not there were any communications relating to a restaurant or food matching up to the date of January 22nd
Yes.
of 2017? And at that point in time, did you note that there were deleted searches on the defendant's cell extraction from her Apple cell phone number 119 for faux restaurants or pho restaurants between the time of 5:12 to 5:15 p.m.?
Yes.
And did you note specifically that although the defendant went back and deleted those searches, that they remained from the data that was able to be carved out from the cell phone extraction?
Yes.
Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
During that same period, or just after that period of time, again, from the deleted portions of the messages on the defendant's cell phone at 5:41 p.m., did the defendant send an instant message to somebody regarding
Yes.
fried rice
Yes.
or some specific type of food?
Yes.
What was that?
She sent a message to her daughter Isabella asking if she wanted fried rice for dinner.
And just after 5:41, at 5:45 p.m. to 5:47 p.m., again from the deleted portion of the phone, did the defendant conduct some Google searches?
Yes.
And what did those relate to?
To pho restaurants near her location. Specifically, it provided an address of 19548 Ventura Boulevard, Pho, California, or Pho, CA.
Okay. And were there similar, or was there a search for pho near me or pho near me on the victim's cell phone just before that time as well?
Yes.
Once you were able to obtain that information regarding a search of a particular pho restaurant on Ventura Boulevard, did you then also search, along with the group that heard this information, various, or that particular address of that pho CA or Pho, California?
Yes. I conducted a Google map search, which shows both a street view and an aerial view of the 19548 Ventura Boulevard, where the Pho, California restaurant was located. And I noticed that it had a parking lot in the rear, that it had pillars inside the strip mall, that there was a nail salon inside the strip mall, and that it could be perceived that it was an L or a U-shaped strip mall.
And was that location approximately 4 miles from the Queen Victoria residence where the victim and the defendant were living?
Yes.
And then did you print out those photographs?
Yes.
And at that point, were those photographs that we've seen here in court presented to Mr. Austin?
They were.
Your Honor, I have a 10-page timeline from the defendant's iPhone extraction for the date of January 22nd of 2017 that shows these particular searches as well as the deletions history. May it be marked, please, as people's next in order.
That'd be 259.
Thank you. Swap it out, Your Honor. And this one's 9 pages, Your Honor. I'm going to swap it out for one that's not highlighted. Showing you the Celebrite report. For the defendant's Apple iPhone. Is this the extraction that you looked at for January 22nd of 2017?
Yes.
And if we look over at the right column, what does this column represent? where it says yes in red.
That the information attached to that particular line had been recovered from a deleted area.
If I go to the third page, where there's a line 24, what do we see here at 5:12 p.m.?
See a message, incoming message, instant message from a person that she's identified as Daddy, and I believe that to be the cell phone associated with Fabio Sementilli, to her cell phone number. It's listed as Monica, owner, and the Google search for "Fa near me."
Subsequent to that, are there searches on the web, through the web history on this device, as we talked about, beginning at 5:12 p.m., for Google searches near me?
Yes.
And then below that, again, at 5:13 p.m. on January 22nd, do we see a search specific to this location, faux CA or faux California, as you mentioned?
Yes.
And over to the right, again, does it indicate that these searches were deleted from the defendant's cell phone,
Yes.
but were recovered during the Celebrite extraction?
Correct.
And looking at the following page, page 4, again, do we see multiple searches relating to this same location where the address comes up on line 32 that you just testified about, 19548 Ventura Boulevard?
Correct.
Showing you what's been previously marked as People's 249. Is this one of the photographs that you printed out the day of Mr. Austin's initial interview at Robbery Homicide Division based on identifying the location?
Yes.
And does this document in fact contain his circle around a location in the parking lot?
Yes.
The next page of People's 249, second page, is this again a photograph that you printed out from a computer at Robbery Homicide?
Yes.
And another one here in the third and fourth page, and fourth being an aerial of the location
Yes.
with again Mr. Austin's writing.
Yes.
And once again, if we look at the second page, did this particular strip mall also contain a UPS store as described by Mr. Austin?
Yes.
Subsequent to Mr. Austin identifying that particular location as the location he was describing where there was an attempted hit on Mr. Sementilli the night before he was murdered, was contact made with Mr. Cy Ray, who testified yesterday?
Yes,
And was he provided with some information and asked to look at data for the date of January 22nd, 2017, relating to the defendant, Robert Baker, and the victim?
yes, he was.
Now, during the trial on February 26th, did you and some other detectives plan in order to take Mr. Austin once again out of the jail facility pursuant to a court order to the location where he crossed through a tunnel at Oakdale near the Sementilli residence and describe where he buried the knife?
Yes,
Also, during the proper session in November of last year, when Mr. Austin described a tunnel that he crossed through, once again, was a search conducted during a break on a computer at Robbery Homicide Division for a tunnel near the location of the Sementilli residence,
yes,
and showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 250 or Exhibit 10 from the proffer. Was this photograph shown to Mr. Austin?
it was.
And did he identify this as the tunnel that he used when he was running from the crime scene prior to being picked up by Mr. Baker?
He said it looked like the tunnel, yes.
And so did you take Mr. Austin out to this location on February 26th?
We did.
And at that point in time, did you have him trace his path?
We did, yes.
And was he able to identify the Sementilli residence as the location where he and Mr. Baker jogged up after he came out of the trunk of the rental car in order to conduct the murder?
Yes, he recognized the residence on that date.
Was he able to identify the location or the specific area where he believed he had buried the knife that was utilized during this murder?
He was not able to identify the specific area.
And did he tell you why that was?
The neighborhood had changed.
Overruled.
Sorry, the neighborhood had changed dramatically since 2017 when the knife was buried.
And did you determine that that was accurate based on pictures of the area in 2017 versus today?
Yes, when I went back and looked at archived photos through Google Street View, which archives years of changes on the Street View, I noticed that several landscapings of the residences in and around the area, as well as the facade and residences themselves, had changed since 2017.
There were a couple of defense videos of the victim and the defendant dancing and singing that were played during this trial. Did you obtain, you and your partner, those videos from Jessica Sementilli after her testimony in this case?
We did.
And did she also send you photographs of metadata for those two videos?
She did. She provided a screenshot which showed the date that she had attached to those videos.
And was one of those dated October 31st, Halloween of 2016?
Yes, the video that shows the defendant and Fabio Sementilli dancing was from October 31st of 2016, I believe.
And what about the one of them singing where they appeared to have some kind of animation applied with hats or something of that nature?
Yes, I believe the date of that video was December 3rd of 2016.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further.
The Burke?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Detective Farrell.
Good morning, ma'am.
Detective, when first you assumed responsibility as one of two primary detectives on the investigation in this case in June of 2024.
Correct.
Correct. About 7.5 years after the killing of Fabio Sementilli.
Yes.
Okay. And I think you spoke yesterday and today specifically about information you reviewed when you came into the case about one of the suspects in the case, Christopher Austin, who was already a suspect at the time you came in?
Correct.
Okay. And I think you testified that at the time you came into the case, he was one of the two suspects who had been identified, in fact, right around the time that Mr. Sementilli was killed. Is that right?
I don't know about identified, but he definitely was suspect as being the second jogger in the video and the participant in the murder of Fabio Sementilli.
Okay. When, in your review of the original investigation, when did Christopher Austin's name first come up?
I don't remember the exact date.
Would it be fair to say sometime in the late winter or spring of 2017?
I don't remember, ma'am. I don't remember when his name came on the radar.
Okay. When was the first investigative material that you reviewed in the case created that discussed Christopher Austin?
Honestly, I don't remember. I remember reviewing the material, but not necessarily the dates. If you'd like to refresh my recollection, I don't know what date he became a suspect in the case.
Well, as part of your work in the case, I assume you reviewed the chronology, the murder book, the investigative details of the original investigation?
Certainly. I mean, this was 7.5 years worth of work with 3 prior sets of detectives, and so there was a tremendous, as you know, volume of information.
Okay.
So I don't remember the exact dates. I do remember information pertinent to what our goal at the time was, which was to effect an arrest of Mr. Austin.
Okay. And it would be fair to say, as part of that goal to effect an arrest of Mr. Austin, you reviewed anything in the investigative file that had been discovered related to Mr. Austin?
Yes.
Okay. And what material in the investigative file did you specifically review related to Mr. Austin?
So there was, obviously, we started with the jogger video. There were cell phone records associated with Mr. Austin. There was an identified burner phone that was believed to have belonged to Mr. Austin. There was cell phone mapping, which suggested the burner phone belonged to Mr. Austin. There was, prior to us...
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I think it will be more efficient if we can talk about each item as he, yeah.
You've asked an open-ended question, and
I
you'll be allowed to
apologize.
finish his answer.
Go ahead.
So there were also airline records, which showed Mr. Austin in and around the Los Angeles area at the time of the murder. There was additional cell phone information which suggested Mr. Baker had contacted Mr. Austin at the time his flight arrived. There was additional cell phone information that suggested that Mr. Baker had, as we heard yesterday, dropped Mr. Austin at the flyaway bus. There was information that Mr. Austin had made a purchase of a ticket at the flyaway bus. There was information from the airline records that Mr. Austin had changed his flight so that he left, in my approximation, 6 hours after the murder, which was highly suspicious to us. There was a tremendous amount of things that we reviewed. There was DNA evidence that was recovered, and Detective Roberts had asked Vancouver PD to get a surreptitious sample, and that was examined and inconclusive. So there was a number of things that were reviewed.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's go through those, and do you have your any portion of your investigative file or chronology with you today?
I do not.
When you mentioned that we had these items, are you saying that you had those items at the time that you came into the case in June of 2024?
Yes, most of those items had been obtained, analyzed, and had been deciphered at that point, yes.
The extraction from the cell phones of Mr. Baker, that is something you reviewed when you came into the case, correct?
Yes.
And that extraction demonstrated to you, when was that extraction taken?
I believe there were several extractions done on that phone.
Okay.
The most recent being in June of 2023, I believe.
Okay. And the first extraction of that phone was back in 2017?
Yes.
Okay. And that's something you reviewed?
I'm sure I did. Again, I reviewed, as you know, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands, of documents and electronic files. So yes, in the 4 months prior to the arrest of Mr. Austin, we did our best to review as much as we could of the evidence.
Isn't it a fact that in the extraction that was performed in 2017, after Mr. Baker's phone was seized at the time, on the day he was arrested from his apartment, there was an extraction that reflected communications with Christopher Austin?
I don't remember that. There may have been.
Okay. And isn't it a fact that the surreptitious taking an operation to retrieve Mr. Austin's DNA occurred when Mr. Austin was still living in Alaska, well before you came into the case?
No, I believe that was in Vancouver, Washington, and was done by detectives from the Vancouver Police Department.
When was that?
I don't remember what year that was done.
But before you came into the case?
Before we came into the case, but I'm certain that it was done by the Vancouver Police Department.
And am I correct, Detective? It was also the case that back in 2017, the investigators determined that Mr. Baker had, the day before the murder, gone to the airport, the LAX airport, and in the early morning hours of January 22nd, 2017.
I don't know if that information was available to them.
You didn't review that information?
I don't
when you
remember
came?
seeing that information.
Detective Farrell, when you began your investigation in June of 2024, you were a significant part of your focus was on Christopher Austin?
Yes.
And you shared with us yesterday that you, as part of your investigative work, you reviewed bank records from First Credit Union in Anchorage, Alaska?
Yes, in relation to the purchase of the tickets.
And when were those bank records? Did you make application to get those bank records?
No.
Who did?
The investigators prior to my arrival on the team.
Detective Roberts?
I'm not certain.
Was it someone back before Detective Roberts?
I don't know.
So you did review those records, correct?
In relation to the plane, the flight purchase information, yes.
And those records were obtained by search warrant?
I don't know.
You don't know whether they were obtained by search
They may
warrant?
have been by court order or subpoena. I don't know how they were obtained.
Okay. But when you assumed responsibility for this investigation and were focused on Christopher Austin, you immediately reviewed everything that had been done investigatively on Mr. Austin, correct?
Yes, but we focused on the evidentiary items which suggested Mr. Austin's involvement in this murder.
Okay. Did you feel when you reviewed that in June of 2017 that you had enough evidence to go out and have a probable cause warrant issued by a judge for Mr. Austin's arrest?
The same.
Did you make any attempt in June of 2024 to obtain a probable cause warrant for Mr. Austin's arrest?
Not in June, but later, obviously in October we did.
Right. We're not talking about October, we're talking about June. Is there any reason you didn't make application for a probable cause warrant for Mr. Austin's arrest in June of 2024?
We had written new search warrants for the airline records, and we were working with Vancouver to see if the effect of the arrest was even a possibility. We had to determine whether the Perkins operation could be run in Washington. Those things took time.
So you contacted Vancouver in June of 2017 to start making arrangements?
Roughly.
When you say roughly, was it?
I mean, it might have. We might have gathered the information, learned more about the case, and it may have been in July. I'm not sure if it was June or July. But when we knew that we wanted to proceed against Mr. Austin, we contacted Vancouver PD.
Okay. And when did you first contact Vancouver PD?
Near the beginning of our investigation, our portion of the investigation.
And it would be fair to say that was June?
June or July, somewhere in there.
Okay. And when did you first run the database that you testified about yesterday to search for any traffic citations or any database that allowed you to discover the citation that Mr. Austin received back on January 23rd, 2017?
Sometime in September, I think.
So you decided to start the process for arresting Mr. Austin in June of 2024 by contacting that month or the month after Vancouver and speaking to your Perkins team, but you didn't do the search on the database till September of 2024?
Objection, cumulative.
So ruled.
Correct.
Detective, did you feel as a over 2-decade detective in robbery homicide that the search of the database and discovery of that citation was a significant and essential component of your probable cause determination to get an arrest warrant for Mr. Austin?
I wouldn't say it's significant. It was a portion. I mean, there was a number of other elements that suggested probable cause was present to arrest Mr. Austin before the citation was, but it was significant.
Okay. You just said there was a number of other elements that was probable cause to arrest Mr. Austin before you got the citation. When did you have those elements before you got the citation?
Some of them we had when we assumed the investigation. As I mentioned, new warrants were generated for the airline travel. So we waited for those to be returned to ensure that the information was correct on that, as well as to determine if there were additional flights that had been missed with other carriers. So, I mean, that was something that took some time.
Okay. So you said some of the elements of sufficient probable cause you had before you took over the investigation, correct?
Some.
Okay. Which were those?
Well, I mean, his physical appearance was one element that was documented in the probable cause warrant.
Okay.
That was one that was known to us.
Okay.
We actually had some phone analysis done on his personal phone, which was known to him, as well as the burner phone, to examine whether the two phones appeared to be connected in any way. So that was something that we generated at a later time.
Okay.
So the phone numbers were known.
I apologize for interrupting. Why don't we talk about, my question was before.
Again, Your Honor, I'm going to ask the witness be allowed to answer this
You did
question.
ask him about
She
any
asked the
questions.
question.
You may finish.
Objection non-responsive
That's
as to the
overruled.
latter part.
That is not.
Okay.
The information you're asking about is before?
Yes,
So the
sir.
information that, the burner phone that was associated with Robert Baker had made numerous calls to this other burner phone, which was eventually established to belong to Mr. Austin. That information was known to us before.
Okay.
We had information about the airline tickets, which was known to us before,
Okay.
that he traveled to Los Angeles. I believe that the information about Baker going to the airport in and around the time the flight arrived was known to us. And his departure from the flyaway, I believe, was known to us as well.
Okay. And what were the elements of probable cause that you felt were sufficient that you gathered after the time in June of 2024 and became the primary investigator in the case?
So a couple of the things we wanted to establish that the burner phone that Detective Roberts had discovered was purchased in Alaska, several miles from Austin's known residence. We wanted to try to show that likely belonged to Austin. So we asked for an analysis to be done to show that calls that were made from his known number were the corresponding data from the burner number, that two of them seemed to appear to use the same cell tower, which to us suggested that the burner phone was being used by Austin.
Okay. And you included that later in October of 2024, in October of 2024 in your probable cause statement that you and your partner wrote?
Yes.
Okay. And what else did you find after you became involved in the case that you believed was an element of the probable cause to arrest Mr. Austin?
When we received the airline records, the changing of the ticket, the documentation which showed the adjusting of the ticket from the scheduled return on the 24th of January to the 23rd of January, where he paid a fee to return early, we found that to be significant, that it was 6 hours after the murder that he seemed to abruptly leave the Los Angeles area after having only been in Los Angeles for a short period of time.
But you already had those documents when you came into the case, and it was after that you identified that you believed they were significant?
Yes,
Like that is that's not evidence.
So,
yes, that information was significant to us, but it was reiterated through the warrant that we did to ensure that that information was correct.
What from the return on the warrant that you did after you came into the case was different in your analysis from the information you had from before you came into the case that showed he changed his ticket?
Well, we wanted to ensure that there wasn't additional flight information that would suggest that he left on a different airline, or that there was additional travel. I also have a recollection of a reserve police officer doing a follow-up to the airline to determine this change, because it's very hard to read those records if you look at them. They're not very clear, but that the change information was done at the LAX counter, so we wanted to ensure that that was correct.
But you already had that information when you came into the case?
I believe so.
Okay. And anything else that you obtained or secured as a result of your investigation that you identified as a new element of probable cause in order to effect the arrest of Mr. Austin?
Not that I remember.
You've told us quite a bit about the significant operation by robbery homicide to effect the arrest for Mr. Austin for first-degree murder, correct?
For the probable cause arrest warrant for murder, yes.
Okay. And that was for first-degree murder, correct?
We don't assign the degrees of murder. Murder is the penal code section that we ask for the probable cause arrest warrant for.
Okay. So you were not asking for a probable cause warrant for first-degree 187 murder?
I asked for a probable cause arrest warrant for 187 PC murder.
Okay. You didn't ask for a probable cause warrant for second-degree murder?
No.
And I think you testified that you had 8 other robbery homicide detectives, or 6 others, and you and Detective Byers, and a robbery homicide lieutenant, plus the Perkins detectives when you flew up to Vancouver, Washington at the beginning of October. Is that right?
Correct.
And prior to flying up to Washington, you had applied for this Ramey warrant, correct?
Yes.
And as part of the application for the Ramey warrant, you and your partner submitted an affidavit, a sworn affidavit, about the probable cause and your work on the case to support a judge hopefully issuing an arrest warrant for Mr. Austin for homicide, correct?
Yes.
And as part of that affidavit in support of the arrest warrant for homicide, am I correct that you indicated in the affidavit that the detectives, and I assume that's you and your partner, believe evidence recovered from Austin and I assume his residence may establish a nexus between Christopher Austin and Monica Sementilli.
Yes.
Would it be accurate to say that in that affidavit in support and in your work in the case prior to flying up to Vancouver, Washington to arrest Mr. Austin, you were looking to determine a nexus, if one existed, between Mr. Austin and Monica Sementilli?
Well, I mean, that would be part of the investigation. The investigation thus far has suggested strongly her involvement in this murder, so wanted to know, as we believe it to be a conspiracy to commit a murder, what her role was in relation to Mr. Austin.
So the answer would be yes. That was one of the reasons you were going to Vancouver, was to see if there was a nexus between Christopher Austin and Monica Sementilli.
The answer is yes, that was evidence that we hope to obtain in the arrest and or search of the locations associated with Christopher Austin.
Detective, prior to going to Washington, what evidence specifically did you have that there was any nexus or relationship between Christopher Austin and Monica Sementilli?
Indirectly, we knew about the relationship between Mr. Baker and Monica Sementilli,
Okay.
and then we established the relationship between Mr. Austin and Mr. Baker. So that's why we were seeking that information between any nexus or connection between Ms. or the defendant and Mr. Austin.
So is the truthful answer no, you didn't have any direct evidence of any relationship between Monica Sementilli and Christopher Austin at the time you went up to arrest Mr. Austin?
Objection argumentative.
As form sustained.
Detective Farrell, let me ask you again, what specific direct evidence did you have at the time you flew up to arrest Mr. Austin for murder of any relationship or contact between Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Austin?
The evidence that we had suggested much contact between a person we knew to be involved in the murder of Fabio Sementilli, Mr. Baker, and a connection between the defendant, Monica Sementilli, and Mr. Baker. We established or believed that Mr. Austin was the second suspect who's seen in the jogger video. So we knew it to be a conspiracy to commit murder against Mr. Fabio Sementilli, so we were seeking that evidence.
So is the truthful answer no, you didn't have any direct evidence of any relationship or contact between Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Austin at the time you flew up to Vancouver?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
Mr. Detective Farrell, when you flew up to Washington to effect Mr. Austin's arrest for murder, you also executed or asked that a number of search warrants be executed for the seizure of evidence from Mr. Austin and his residence?
Yes.
And a good deal of evidence was seized?
Some electronic evidence, yes.
Okay. And that electronic evidence included computer devices, cellular devices, correct? Was other evidence seized?
I'd have to look at the property report, but I think that the bulk of it was electronic evidence.
And for each of the pieces of evidence you seized, including the digital devices, those were analyzed?
Yes,
Okay. And they were identified as being Mr. Austin's?
some of them, and some of them were shared devices.
Okay.
Some of them were identified as not belonging to Mr. Austin at all.
Okay. And of all the devices that were seized, both those belonging to Mr. Austin, those, I assume you're talking about devices were seized from family members as well?
Yes,
And then what devices were seized from people that were unrelated to Austin?
his wife's cell phone was seized.
Okay, that was a family member. Were there any non-family members whose computers or devices were seized?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And there was an analysis performed of communications, messages, texts, phone calls?
Yes,
And am I correct? Nowhere in any of the evidence that was seized and reviewed by you all and analyzed and obtained, did you find any evidence on the property seized that had anything to do with Monica Sementilli?
correct.
You testified about a very extensive Perkins operation that you supervised to have conducted as part of your operation going to Washington, yes?
Yes,
Objection states the evidence regarding supervised.
It's overruled.
I participated as an investigating officer in it, yes. The Perkins unit works independently of the investigators.
So they were already on the case at the time you came into the case?
They're a resource, much like a surveillance unit, that you ask for their assistance in the case.
Okay. And did you ask for their assistance?
Yes,
Okay. Did you make arrangements for them to accompany you up to Washington?
yes,
Did you, I think in your testimony you were asked about a briefing of the Perkins team?
yes,
Did you participate in that briefing?
yes.
And when was that briefing?
It was the day of the operation, October 2nd.
Okay.
Take our morning recess for 15 minutes. The admonition applies. See you back here in 15.